Number 1. This happened a few years ago when I was 13 years old. I was somewhat popular in school at the time, and I had around 4 very close friends. Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach were the main ones. We went on many adventures around that time, camping, road trips, the beach. Noah's family was pretty wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One day, the summer before 8th grade, we went on a camping trip with Lynn's older sister Margaret and Zach's older brother Todd. So there were 7 of us. Lynn, Zach, and I were 13. Noah and Rose were 14, and Margaret and Todd were both 17. We decided to go camping in a nearby forest, around 20 miles from Noah's house. It was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Noah's house and his neighborhood were the closest homes, and there were no signals for phones or any electronics. We get to the spot easily, and without problems, and we make camp. The girls in one tent, the boys in another. Maybe it was a bad idea to have 17s ages 13 to 17 with no phone signals in the woods, but our parents were lenient, as I said, and confident that we would be fine since these woods were not known for anything bad or dangerous. So, we set up the tents, go swimming in a nearby lake, and come back and make dinner over a fire which was about 20 feet away from the tents, which were 4 feet away from each other. We have s'mores and do all those stupid camping things before Lynn and Margaret announced that they were going to sleep. That left Todd, Rose, Zach, Noah, and myself, as we joked around and told scary stories, and just overall had a good time. Then, Margaret walks up annoyed and tells us that whoever it was messing around with the side of the tent should stop. Keep in mind, no one left the group, and the tents were far enough away so we wouldn't bother anyone inside the tents. She explains that someone keeps on touching the side of the tent, running something on it, and we dismiss her. Todd states that it's probably a tree branch, and Rose and I decided to go to sleep at this point. So we head back to the tent. Lynn is asleep, and we settle in. Me closest to the opening, Margaret next to Lynn, who's at the opposite side of the tent, and Rose in between Margaret and myself. I managed to fall asleep easily within 5 minutes, until I woke up suddenly for what seemed like no reason. I checked my phone. I still brought it and a portable charger with it just to take pictures, and it was literally the middle of the night at around 2:15. I looked around, my eyes getting used to the darkness, trying to figure out why I woke up. A tapping sound on the tent was what I noticed first, and a soft giggling. It sounded somewhat deep, like a male voice, but I couldn't be sure. After what felt like an hour, but was probably a minute or 2, the tapping and giggling stopped. I was convinced that it was my imagination, or maybe one of the boys trying to prank us, or even a tree branch, like Todd suggested earlier. Telling myself it was a tree branch and a lack of sleep, I fell back asleep until Rose woke me up at around dawn. Everyone was awake and we decided to hike a little. We decided to go into 2 groups because we planned on spending the night again, and we didn't want anyone messing around with our stuff. Even though these woods weren't popular with camping, we didn't want to risk it. Margaret, Lynn, Rose, and myself left to go hiking for a couple of hours, while the boys opted out to stay behind and fish, swim, and cook food. We hiked for about 2 hours, and we came back to the boys, not at the campsite. Annoyed, Margaret went down to the lake with Lynn to find them. Rose and myself made our way back to the tents, and I'll be honest and say I screamed and almost wet my pants. The tent was slashed. I inspected it closer after regaining composure, because I was usually the more collected one of the 2 of us. It seemed like it was done with a small knife, as the cuts were tiny. Our tents were made of material that was pretty hard to cut into, and it seemed like the person had a pocket knife, I guessed. The boys, Margaret and Lynn, came running to our screams, and were obviously startled. We decided to pack up and head back home early, because for 1, the tents were ripped too much to use again comfortably, and 2, Rose and Lynn and I were very creeped out. We were even more freaked out when Todd announced that his tires were slashed, We were all freaking out, obviously. There was no cell service, Todd's tires were slashed, and there was no way any of us wanted to stay any longer. Luckily, Todd reported that Margaret's tires looked fine, and Margaret stated that she would take Noah and Lynn, drop them off to call 911 and their parents, and come back for us. She drove a car where there was not enough room for more than 3 people, as the back was filled up with the camping stuff. Zach, Todd, Rose and myself were left at the campgrounds, and we decided to begin a hike back towards the main road so Margaret wouldn't have to drive so far. Also, Rose and myself refused to stay anywhere near the camp area. We began hiking. My phone died. The last time I looked at it, it was 1 in the afternoon. Zach and Rose both had working phones and constantly updated us on how far we had been walking. I began to hear branches snapping from behind us, closer to the trees than we walked, and I got more and more paranoid as time went on, even though it was daytime. I told Todd, and he seemed to get more wary of our surroundings, constantly looking over his shoulder. We had been walking for about 30 minutes, and Margaret was probably at Noah's house or almost there, when Todd screamed, "Run!" Naturally, I looked behind my shoulder before I began running. 3 hooded figures were running towards us. 2 had knives, and they all looked around 6'3" or taller. Todd was 6'1", but I doubted that he could have defended all of us against them. Even though it was broad daylight, I couldn't make out any facial features. They all appeared over and around 200 pounds, and the shortest one was probably 6'2", but they all wore hoods and had masks on, like ski masks. It sounds really fake, I know, but I don't care if you don't believe me. What I saw was terrifying, and I was scared shitless that day. We began running, and the 3 guys finally gave up, or decided that we weren't worth terrorizing, because we lost them. We made it to the main road where we waited, walking quickly, constantly looking over our shoulders in fear until Margaret arrived. We told the police everything, and they searched the woods nearby. They never found any evidence we had been there, or that anything had happened, besides pictures of the lake around the area and the shredded tents. I'm so thankful that I told Todd about them. I have no doubt that they would have been able to catch us if he hadn't been looking over his shoulder constantly, and I'm so thankful that we all got physical activity regularly and were fast enough to outrun them, and they gave up. Number 2. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheapy little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long, narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area, and it was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for about 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. No reason to be. I was just curiously watching. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline. And this was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road, looking straight into the campsite where I am at. I don't know if he knew I could see him, but he was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then, he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunched form. It looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of that mushy, frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. I could hear him trampling behind me. Leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to where I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and an oof noise that came from the man, which I can only imagine him tripping or almost tripping, or maybe got face slapped by a tree branch. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got there, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire. I broke down crying and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened. My aunt spoke up and said, "Oh geez. He probably thought he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke." She dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now." They all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general. I'm very cautious and shy. For that time being, I let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, it was still a great trip. It was time well spent with my family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself anywhere. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. So, Mr. Campground Chaser or whatever the hell you were, please, let's never meet again. Number 3. This is really weird, and I would say a close call. When me and my friends were about 14 or 15 years old, we used to go camping in the woods by our houses, a place called the Punchy that was pretty close to an old church and a graveyard, but far away enough as to not creep you out. Anyway, we used to take 2 tents, and obviously not telling our parents, we would steal some beer to take with us. This one time in particular, a few girls from school came with us too. Naturally, they also lied to their parents about where they would be. Anyway, story goes, we were getting drunk and playing dares. Typical teen stuff, sitting around a fire with logs as seats, and we would just have fun. It's getting pretty late, and so some people had gone home by this point, and so there were still 7 of us, 4 boys including myself, and 3 girls. It's dark now, probably about 10 PM, and we had split up the 2 tents. We were still drinking and generally playing dates that revolved around kissing and telling truths. This is when I hear the footsteps coming from the trees outside the tent, and I found this super strange, so I stuck my head out through the opening, but nothing was there. This weirded me out, but I forgot about it after 5 minutes. Then it happens again. I look, and nothing. This begins to really weird me out. So I ask if anyone else had noticed the sounds, and they say no. So at this point I'm thinking, damn, I must be drunk and hearing random things. Next thing I know, there is something brushing against the tent. And if you've ever run your fingers along a tent, then you know the distinctive sound that it makes. You'd recognize that sound anywhere. So I couldn't see it move, like it wasn't the section that we were sitting on. At this point, everyone else had noticed the sounds, and the tent is dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. And it stayed silent for about 2 minutes. Now, if you've ever been in a situation like this, the silence is deafening, and it feels like breaking the silence will have dire consequences. My friend says, "Did you guys hear that?" We all say yes. "Well, what was it?" "A branch or something," I replied, because I didn't really know what to say, but I wanted to say something. We all stick our heads out of the tent, and once again, nothing. I was certain that someone was out there, and I just got that gut feeling that you get. When you know, and I felt like I knew. The tent was in the middle of the woods, but it was inside a clearing, and there were no branches anywhere near close enough to have touched the tent. Also, no paths, so nobody would have any reason to be nearby. We carry on believing that we were going mad. Then, out of nowhere, something hit the tent like pretty hard. So we gasped, and all of us moved back towards the end of the tent, opposite the opening. Not that it would have done any good, because it's a tent. I realized something is definitely wrong, and grabbed the bat that we had used to hit the pegs in. I can't remember what my friend said, but I remember it being something to do with our friends that left, pranking us. We thought they came back to scare us. It put me at ease for a bit, and I agreed, so me and my friend left the tent and started laughing and asking our friends to show themselves. We were laughing nervously, but no one showed up. I found this super weird because, it was like the jig was up, and they had had their scare. So where the hell are they? I walked over to the next door and told my friend who was in there with his girlfriend that the other guys had come back and are pranking us, so don't be shocked or scared if they do anything weird, and that they were being assholes. He agreed that that was likely. We went back into my tent. Then, my friend in the tents next door, which was only a few yards away, said that he was going for a piss, and if he could please borrow the flashlight. I threw it outside the tent and carried on talking to the others. About a minute later, he pops his head back inside and asks for the flashlight again, and I said that I just threw it out for him. He said he didn't see where it went because he was throwing clothes on while he was inside the tent. We assumed the flashlight had rolled away or something, so we had a little look around and couldn't find it. I found this real strange because there really wasn't anywhere for it to go. The ground was fairly level, and I couldn't see it rolling anywhere, not to mention it was bright green and would have obviously stood out. So I lent my friend the lantern and told him to be quick because we would have no light, and I didn't like the idea of no light considering things were getting weird, and I tried to convince him to piss without the lantern, but he wasn't having it. He walks off and we carry on talking. There is 6 of us at this point, as my friend's girlfriend joins us because she didn't want to be in the tent on her own while her boyfriend went for a piss. Next minute, my friend comes back from taking a piss. He sticks his head back in the tent, panicking, and says, Hey guys, I'm not fucking kidding, but there is a man out there. I thought he was fucking around, but I also panicked a bit because if it was our friends pranking us, surely we would have heard them laughing or something by now. I stuck my head outside the tent and no one was there, but my friend said that he was standing outside just beyond the tree line. And my friend looked fucking terrified, so I took his word for it at this point. The girls were panicking and I didn't really know what to do. We whispered amongst ourselves who should go and asked this guy what the fuck he was doing here and if our friend was seeing things. So we agreed 3 of us would go. We took the little bat and walked to the tree line, and sure enough, there is this man just standing there. He had long messy hair and a beard, but was slim as anything and dressed in camo gear. My friend asked what he was doing here, to which he replied in a weird and blank manner, "I'm walking." We asked why he was walking in the middle of nowhere and if he was the one by our tents messing with us, to which he replied, "Them tents ain't yours." This guy was fucking weird, and he was creepy as anything. Just his expression. He then casually walked off into the woods, and we were standing there deciding if we should all leave and go home, and eventually we did. We wanted to leave, but it was too dark and it would be very difficult for us to find our way with just a lantern. We decided to sit on it, so we all got into my tent and waited out until the morning. About 2 hours had passed and we couldn't sleep. Next thing I know, I hear something that sounds like unzipping noise, and this creeped me the fuck out because it was coming from my friend's tent and we were all in my tent. His tent must be empty. Everyone starts whispering what the hell that noise was. One of my friends and myself stuck our heads out of the tent, and there is absolutely nothing there. So we decided to all go outside and look. The 4 boys went outside, so we walk over to the tent and my friend gasps and says, "We need to get the fuck out of here, now." I was confused, so I walked around the other side of the tent, and it's been slashed open corner to corner from behind, and inside the tent was the little green flashlight. Now, this made me freak out because A, we knew this guy wasn't playing around because he just ruined a very expensive tent, and B, he had something very sharp to cut the tents like that. We walked back over to the other tent and got the girls out and most of our stuff, and we left. We started walking towards the road through the woods. The scariest part about this entire thing is that every so often when we were walking towards the road, we could repeatedly hear whispering, but rapid and repetitive whispering, not loud enough to figure out exactly what it was saying or where it was coming from. It felt like an eternity, but this guy was definitely stalking us. After about 35 minutes we got to the road, and we followed the road home because we didn't want to tell our parents we'd been drinking, and if we walked home it would take about 2 hours, so we wouldn't be so drunk when we get home. We were looking behind us the entire time, terrified. Luckily, we all got home safely. The next day we get back to the camping spot to check it out, and sure enough, the tents are gone. A few weeks later, someone we know from school got chased by a weird guy wielding a knife not far from where we were camped, who had camo clothing. This guy was truly terrifying, and it ruined camping for me.
Number 4.
Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in some nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name. It was pretty primitive camping. No cell service, and we saw 2 other people there the entire time. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend pretty much immediately said that those 2 people that we saw seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what had happened that night, but I'll describe it. The first person was a woman who had her truck parked off the trail and the hood open. I don't really notice these types of things, but my boyfriend said it looked to him as if she was waiting for someone to pull up next to her and offer to help with her truck. Normally, my boyfriend is the type of person to just call for help at least, but he said that she skeeved him out enough that he didn't want to be drawn to her attention more than what's necessary. The next person we saw drove by several times while we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice though until my boyfriend pointed out to me that he'd already done that twice. Whether these two people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up at around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said that to him it sounded similar to a chain gun revving up or someone using a large tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again and again, and it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me that it was probably miles off. I didn't question this because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Well, later on, my boyfriend told me that at the time he told me that it was far away because he didn't want to scare me. It actually sounded like it was coming right from down the little dirt road. At one point, he said that he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he was afraid it could be someone trying to scare us out of the tent for some dreadful reason. He whispered, and I should have noticed that he was whispering and knew that something was wrong, since otherwise he'd just speak to me normally, right? But anyway, he whispered for me to just go back to sleep. However, I could not, because every little sound that I heard outside sounded like someone was sneaking up to the tent. Eventually my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was about 20 minutes after that sound had stopped. He held our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, or close to it, so we didn't need a light. While we were packing quickly, I noticed something terrifying. I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. And it wasn't there when we went to sleep at around 10 p.m, and neither of us even brought any beer. There was someone on our campfire right next to our tent. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of that trip, we either camped in areas well populated by other campers, or we got a hotel room. So whoever, or what the fuck that was, let's never meet again.